Because we share. Because we share.
In the MVS Core Technologies project opening, probably a lot of you were there, and you heard John Shebby talk about, he tangentially mentioned this new function APAR, APAR OA46291. Okay, and the implementation of that particular APAR caused the high half of R15 to be non-zero even after a successful storage obtained with cond equals yes. Now, actually, it turns out that this function is rolled back. There's 3 different PTS, but it's only ZOS 2.1 that's affected, okay? Now, it's actually perfectly legal to do that. The high half of R15 is not part of the documented interface for almost any service in the world. In fact, when they went to 64-bit, they were very careful to say, do not depend on the high half of R15 as part of your return code checking. And lots of people did anyway by mistake. So we ended up with lots of software products that had failures. We also ran into this, okay? We had a LTGR 1515 after a storage obtained conditional one. And so because it was non-zero, the product thought that there wasn't enough storage when in fact there was. And he talked about some situations where the IBM product would keep trying smaller and smaller amounts and get into a loop trying to get storage. So it's a real problem. And we corrected that with this instruction instead, load and test grande forward register, okay? Now the thing is, if it was just us, IBM would have said, you should have read the book, you should have been, But instead, since so many of their products broke, they decided to change it, right? And it's kind of like history being written by the victor kind of thing, So anyway, so it was Mark PE, and so they got a new APAR out of that, OA48273, which is open to clear the high half of R15. I checked, I don't think this thing's closed yet, but it's an easy thing. I guess you can get the plus APAR from IBM. But from my perspective, what I wanted to talk about here was the APAR that drove all this, because now it's not going to end up on your system, and it'll give you a chance to take a look at it. And that is this new APAR that's intended to reduce the number of IPTE instructions that are being issued. So an IPTE, invalidate page table entry, what it does is when you free up a page, it's one thing to update your page control blocks. That's that thing. But when you issue IPTE, it's an instruction that goes out and essentially clears the TLB, right? And it doesn't just clear it on your processors that you're on. It clears it on all the processors in your book and all in your drawer and across all the drawers. And basically every processor that might have access to this piece of storage has to get a signal to tell it to go ahead and free up the TLB, okay? So when you have lots and lots and lots of processors like these new machines can have, it can actually be kind of slow in the grand scheme of things to issue an IPTE. So they decided to try to bypass that. That's what this APAR does. It's like now when you free main a page, it no longer actually frees the real storage in many cases. Okay, it's driven by RSM, SRM decisions, blah, blah, blah. But so you can end up with this situation where the real storage is not freed in the traditional sense. And so there's some interesting side effects, okay? You free a page of storage, you get mained or storage obtained a page of storage, then you free main or storage release it, and then you reference it, and you don't die, right? It keeps on going. You don't get the OC4 you used to get. Well, that's a change of behavior, and some people may be surprised by that. You might have dependencies on that in your code, maybe in some ISV code. It's worth knowing. Also, TPROT. Okay, a lot of people were using TPROT in the old days to test storage addresses, test protection. And then there were a lot of people in the old days that used LRA for this same purpose. And then when 64-bit came out in Z architecture, LRA wouldn't necessarily work because if it was backed above the bar, even though your virtual may have even been 24-bit, LRA is a problem, right? It fails if the storage is backed above the bar. So you either had to change your code to use LRAG or, but a lot of ISVs didn't want to use LRAG because LRAG didn't necessarily work on older machines. So they switched to TPROT. So you saw this proliferation of TPROT. Well, now TPROT has new behaviors in that it will no longer generate condition code 3 for the freed page unless it happens to be out, right? And then Lastly, configuring storage offline. If you do that and you're in a storage constrained environment, there could be a lot of pages out there that are still in this state, and maybe the configuring of the storage offline may fail. So I just wanted to point that out because I really didn't see it mentioned in too many places, I didn't see it mentioned in any of the places I went, but somebody may have mentioned this. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. Take a look at this thing. There's doc down here. There's a PDF that has all the great doc on it. They wrote like a whole book on this one APAR. Okay, so Dan Rosa is the guy behind this, and he put a lot of really great info in there. But I will tell you that if you want, you could turn this thing off, right? And by the way, it's on Z13 only. So if you're on Z12 something, then it only does it on Z13, okay? But in Diag XX, you can actually code free mainframes no, and that shuts the whole thing off for that system. You can also leave it as free mainframes yes, which is the default, but then you can specify and exclude job list, and those are wildcarded mask things, right? So you could have up to 8 of these and shut it off for a whole class of work if you run into any problems. They also added these new callable services with this APAR. So I'm probably not going to see a lot of ISVs using this right away, but maybe customers will. Anyway, you can pass in an address to be tested, and you get back a return code in register 15. And interestingly enough, I mean, all the return codes I ever used, or defined in services I wrote over the years, usually went by 4s. Probably because in the old days we used to use jump tables to process them or something. So you had 0, 4, 8, 12. That's what we're used to. Whoever wrote this decided to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Why not? I mean, it gives you a bigger return code space anyway. Then again, with 64-bit register, who cares? Oh no, but we're only allowed to use the low half. So, and these are the codes you get back, whether you have read, write, or no access to the page, and whether it's not backed by a so-called free mainframe, and then lastly, the page can't be translated or is backed by a free mainframe. So if you get this last one, then you really need to use VSM list or some other service like that to figure out what's going on there. Anyway, so I just want to make sure you're aware of that. Forewarned is forearmed. This one is about, I just wanted to talk a little bit about NJE over TCPIP. In the old days, way back in August 2002, I actually helped co-author this requirement right here in the JES3 project to ask for TCPIP over native, NJE over native TCPIP. Because there were a lot of people who were pushing enterprise extender and things like that, and those were expensive solutions. And then in the next share, March 2003, the JES2 project had a very similar requirement. And so this right here illustrates part of the value of share, that we put out these requirements. We help guide the direction of IBM development. And we were feeling like the weak sisters, in a sense, as MVS, because VM and VSC were already doing this. And they were connecting via TCPIP, even though there wasn't even an official stack on VSC. They still had the support, so it was pretty amazing. Anyway, IBM delivered this stuff in 2006 and 2007 across the JESs. So it's been like 9 years, and by now, it's become the de facto connection. Are there people in here that are still, pure SNA, and I mean SNA, not Enterprise Extender or somebody like that, that's running NJE over pure SNA? Okay, not one hand. So that's a good thing. So there are people with Enterprise Extender and similar technologies like that, but you can see right there, this has really taken hold. So now we get to the, you talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. So right now it's the ugly. So there are some security APARs that you need to look at now if you are using this NJE over TCPIP functionality. And IBM brought it to our attention. They talked about it in the JES sessions, but not everybody goes to the JES sessions. And so there's an APAR for JES Common, one for JES2 and JES3. There's a new option called NetServe Secure, and you can either say that it's required or optional. And if it's required, then you need to have secure connections. You're not allowed, encrypted connections. You're not allowed to have unencrypted connections, okay? So in JES3, the default is optional for this thing, but obviously it might make sense to set it to required. And also in JES2, they have an additional option called use socket, and so they will, derive the NetServe setting from the socket that net serve is listening to, and they have a secure keyword for that socket that you could say set to yes and no, and so that will effectively set the net serve setting based on what the socket has. Anyway, it affects both sets of connections, inbound and outbound. So I looked at the restart info on here, and I had to laugh because this one, here's the JES common piece, and they talk about, okay, shut all this stuff down and then issue your LLA refresh and then bring it all back up. But if you want to actually use it in JES 2, you need to IPL with CLPA. So then I thought, well, I'm not going to do that. That's too much work. So I couldn't understand even why they do that, but I guess these groups don't necessarily all talk to each other. But then I saw there was a method to their madness because in the JES 3, they actually have a restart on there. So it does make sense. If you happen to be a JES 3 customer putting this on, you could do it without an IPL. So, IBM wanted us to give this message. I'm giving it to you now. There's a secure portal. I think Sam's probably going to be talking about that, so I don't want to steal any of his thunder. But there is a new white paper out there, and if you don't feel bad if you haven't read it yet because it was only published August 3rd, right? NJE security best practices. So if we didn't know what to do before, that's because nobody told us. And now we can read and find out what it is we are supposed to be doing or should have been doing for all these 9 years. And then in general security best practices, you know, what sorts of things should you do? Be careful about who can access your NJE connections through TCPIP. Do Windows computers have access to that? If so, is that coming through a ATTLS type connection? Is there a password on it? You know, what kind of security do you have? They don't really give you hints as to what these problems are, but you can sort of guess at maybe what some of the issues were, where the exposure might be. All right. So lastly, Tom. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. All right. Well, I was just in the interest of time. Okay. In the interest of time, I was trying to move on. This has been around a long time too. JES spool class. That's been around a long time since RACF 1.9. And the point that Tom wants me to hammer home, so I will do it because you've asked me to, is that the JES spool class protects your data sets on spool. Okay. So it's very similar to the dataset class in your standard for your standard files. So if you do not have JES spool active, then these spool data sets are not protected. So anyone who can use an unauthorized SSI type service to get out a spool data set without JES spool protection would then be able to read that spool data set. So it's important to have JES spool active in your shops. That's because it used to be an authorized service, and some very inventive soul decided to make it an unauthorized service some little while ago. 1.9. Okay, so keep that in mind. That means you have an exposure. Okay, so TPG. I'll try to go quickly through this. But basically, there was this APAR here, OA46391, and we started getting these OC4s, and we didn't understand why, or our customers did. And it's because the TPG service inside this module, VT put, was trying to write onto the input parameter list. And it was pretty shocking. So we dumped out the code and looked at it, and R4 was the TCB address. R1 turns out to be the TCB PKF value, if you know what that is, the protection key that the task is started with. And then you had this move with destination key. They were moving 1 byte back into the parameter list. And we thought, oh, well, that code's been around a long time. Maybe something, I'm sorry, the writing back to the parm list was something new. So when we researched it, we found, no, writing back to the parm list is something the operating system has been doing forever and ever and ever. Probably goes back to the MVT days or whenever it was TSO first came out. This is the parameter list that TPG uses, and there's a little line in there that says, oh, by the way, we set this indicator in the TPG parameter list to let you know that register 0 contains an output buffer number. I didn't even know this was there, to be honest. So what that meant then, since this was really old, is that they changed the way they write to this thing, so then I wanted to look it up and find the APAR, but it couldn't be viewed. Well, if you find an APAR that can't be viewed, it means it's an integrity APAR. That is how IBM does it rightly or wrongly, that is what they do. They don't want the description of the APAR to where anybody could read it, because then they think maybe somebody could exploit it, right? So that's usually a security APAR, an integrity APAR. I have no knowledge at all as to what actually happened, which is good, because if I did, then I'd probably be under NDA and I couldn't tell you, or they'd have to kill me. But since I don't know, then I have the freedom to speculate. Now, hopefully I can educate a guess and figure out some of this stuff. So anyway, what I'm thinking is they probably were turning that bit on in the input parameter list, maybe in key 0 or something like that. And so if somebody invoked TPG and pointed to funny storage, they could cause bits to get turned on in different places in the system. That might not be good. It might be that they could cause, you know, key 0 code somewhere to, you know, the instruction could change because this bit got turned on. I mean, it's scary, actually, if you think about it. So if that's in fact what it was, I highly understand why they did it. But the way they changed it was they wanted to use the TCPIP key, which didn't work for us because we had authorized privileged code doing TPG. And so we talked to IBM and, you know, said, we think you're creating a new exposure here, because now privileged code has to put the TPG parameter list into non-privileged type storage that anybody could write on, and they could do it asynchronously, and then we might be writing who knows what to a screen. And so the Z System Center for Secure Engineering agreed with us and told the IBM TSO guys to make a change there. So anyway, that's the APAR. And what I was going to recommend is, now, you know, it's either my educated guess or some other thing. I have no idea, honestly, no actual real knowledge about what the problem was. But it may be a good idea, probably is a good idea, to get that APAR installed. And then the fallout from that APAR, possible OC4s and products like ours and others, you may want to then add on this new one that we got opened up to avoid those disruptions. Okay?